welcome back to our webinar series on cyber attack prevention and recovery. My name is Alan Mack. I'm a partner and the National Leader of Forensic Disputes and Investigations here at BDO Canada. Our last webinar focused on how organizations can mitigate the risk of cyber attacks and prepare for the inevitable cyber attack. Our on-demand webinar series is available to watch and revisit on our website at bdo.ca. Our discussion today now turns to the aftermath of a cyber breach and how you can react and recover as quickly as possible while minimizing damage. We all know that cyber threats are getting more and more sophisticated. Virtually all organizations are at risk or are actively targeted. In this discussion, we'll dive into what you should do once you have been a victim of a cyber attack. Today is my colleague Chetan Sehgal, a partner in BDO's forensic team, Rocco Galetto, partner and our national leader in cybersecurity, and our special guest, April Costin, who is a partner at Dentons, and she specializes in privacy law and breaches. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. This may be a silly question, but as I reflected on it, I think it's actually a question that makes a lot of sense. How do you know that you have been breached? And it occurred to me it's a silly question, but oftentimes you may not know because the bad guys don't exactly knock on your door and say, "Here I am." They just come in and take whatever they want. So how do you know you've been breached? Rocco, can you share your thoughts with us on that?
Alan, it's not a silly question at all. In fact, if I rewind back to early in my career, it was quite often that organizations wouldn't know. They would be notified by a third party that they'd been breached. Now, over the course of the last few years, to your point, threat actors have kind of changed their tactics, the types of attacks that are coming out and hitting organizations are those that are, I'll call, louder and very apparent. So it's quick to realize when you've been hit with ransomware because your systems are just inoperable. But even today, what quite often happens is organizations are notified still externally, although internal teams are getting better at detecting these attacks in real time. So the detection capabilities are getting better, but it's still often notified by third party, where it might be law enforcement that calls in a tip to say, "Hey, we've seen some data leave your environment, or we've seen some ongoing persistent connections." And usually law enforcement would know about these because they're monitoring them as part of a broader campaign. Your organization may have been part of that campaign. So you end up getting the tip call from law enforcement or government in some cases. And they've got amazing systems to be able to detect this type of activity across our infrastructure. The other way that organizations are able to detect is through newer technology solutions that help identify threat behavior, and also people who are providing security services, whether that's internally provided or they rely on a third party, and they're able to detect anomalies and then quickly mobilize to try to mitigate any risk. And then finally, still, it's the smash and grab type attacks where it's just so obvious. It's ransomware, our systems are inoperable, and at that stage is when panic usually sets in.
So let's turn our minds to it happens. It happened. Your organization has been hit. You've been notified. You discovered one way or another. Hopefully, it's not everything being frozen. What are the first steps that you should take? And I think each of you, from your different specializations and perspectives, will have something to offer. So why don't we start with April? What would be your advice to your clients once they've discovered that they've been the victim of a cyber attack?
I think the first thing you want to do is assemble your team and notify legal as quickly as possible. And the reason why I'm going to say notify legal quickly is not self-serving, but it's in order to enable privilege to be on all of the subsequent things that you're going to do to respond to your cybersecurity event. whether it's engaging external third parties to conduct the investigation, discussions around risk mitigation, uh, discussions around, what actually has been taken, what do we need to do to notify people, all of those things. You want to try to make as much of that covered by privilege as you possibly can. And in order to do that, you need to have legal engaged right off the bat. Legal can often act as a bit of a quarterback with respect to your incident response process and help you retain those external experts and enter into those retainer letters, because then everything that legal is instructing those third party experts to do also can now be covered by privilege. So I think that is a really key thing. And another thing that you're going to want to do sooner than later is identify what's been taken. And from my perspective as a privacy lawyer, it's what personal information has been impacted. And the reason why that's really important is because there are obligations to report breaches to regulatory bodies as quickly as possible, as well as obligations to notify affected individuals so that they can take the appropriate steps to protect themselves. Because obviously, one of the most significant risks when you're dealing with personal information being taken is identity theft. So you want to be able to allow individuals to take the appropriate precautions there. So those are probably two of the big things that I always recommend addressing as quickly as possible.
Advice, and it comes to mind that given the need to react quickly and for sound advice in terms of quarterbacking, as you say, figure out what the next steps are, it's important to keep in mind that you actually want someone who's very familiar and comfortable with the process. You may well have a trusted business advisor who's a corporate lawyer for your business, but that person may not be experienced in recovering from cyber breaches. And so you really want someone who specializes in this field so that there's no learning curve, that someone who can hit the ground running with ideas and a strategy right off the bat. Rocco, what are your thoughts on how to react once you've been hit?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Alan, with what April described. Like the number of times that we get a call out of the blue from an organization and they haven't engaged with external counsel to help support the investigation and make sure, to April's point, that we've got privilege across the investigation, any of the discovery that we do, and even root cause analysis in many cases. You just want to keep that information tight so that you're protecting not only the organization, but any individuals that might be impacted. The other piece of it is what has been taken. So in order to do a proper risk assessment, and April alluded to it a little bit around what's the identity theft, like what's the opportunity that the data provides from a privacy standpoint for an adversary to take advantage of, right? Whether that's identity theft or some form of harm to individuals. And it may be corporate secrets that are kept in a certain area. So how do we make sure that we identify quickly what data is extracted or had access to by an unauthorized party? The reason we do this, again, is just making sure that we understand we're meeting any regulatory obligations, we're being responsible in how we're performing the investigation, triage, and then recovery steps of the breach. So again, having the external party come in and help that. The importance of also demonstrating an independence perspective as well. So, you have somebody independent of the organization, a second set of eyes that is truly there to guide. I think also helps ensure that, you're viewed as responsible in your actions to recovery.
That's a very good point, because even though an organization may be the victim, once it becomes known that there has been an attack, there are responsibilities and obligations on the organization and its leadership have.
And that's a big one, Alan. Honestly, is the organization doing the right thing? Are they taking the right steps? Do we, as users of the service or consumers of the service, have confidence that that organization is being responsible in their actions?
Very important indeed. Now, turning our minds to recovery and investigating the why, perhaps. Shaden, what are your thoughts on immediate um, actions that an organization should take.
Back to the insurance angle, evidence preservation is huge. Like whether it's for insurance recovery perspective or other reasons such as public image, knowing what happened, when it happened, what was the cause of it, will go to serve a long way. So from a biggest tip, document everything. Document everything. Detailed narratives of what happened, who was contacted when, what did we know when. Uh, have people involved in the team take detailed notes of what they're seeing, how they're reacting, what they're doing. Um, I'll talk about this in a later section as well as a concrete example. But one of the things we've noticed is people move on. But record keeping plays a big role as these insurance claims, let's say, unfold over time. Um, there are lots of expenses being incurred. There's lots of activity that takes place, lots of service providers. So when we're in that rush to um, get the job done, plug the hole, so that you stop the bleeding from a attack perspective, a lot of things happen, but why they happen sometimes is not clear. So I'll give you an example from an expenses perspective. Was an expense incurred to plug a hole? Was it purely for incident response purpose, and that is covered by the insurance policy perhaps? Or was it for future proofing the business? Was it betterment of your old systems that were maybe already not up to standards, and you were looking to replace them a year from now or something like that? Bucketing those costs into the right category will be very important for your insurance claim from a recovery perspective. Now, thinking about the other impact of on your business, many a times cyber insurance policies, you know, neglect to some degree the sufficient coverage from a business interruption perspective or loss of profits, if you will. Documenting how the impact, the incident will impact your revenue generation, expenses that you may need to incur. All of that will be, again, very important. So again, coming back to documenting everything, creating perhaps specific general ledger or accounting codes to keep track of those costs will serve really well when it comes to actually pursuing your insurance claim.
Very good. That's actually a lot of good advice, of course. But there's an element of, again, knowing what to do when it happens as opposed to figuring it out. And that goes to understanding what you need to keep record of, how to document your expenses, how to categorize them, just having that game plan go forward. And I think there's a consistent theme throughout all of your advice about knowing what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And it all goes to timeliness, I think, because time is of the essence. When these things happen, you really cannot afford to learn as you go. You have to have your plan ready to execute. And it brings to mind one example that I can recall where, because a victim of a cyber attack had a plan, they actually had lawyers ready on standby, on retainer, ready to go. When they found out they had been hit and it resulted in some unauthorized transfers from their bank account, they were actually able to trace, freeze, and recover almost all the payments. It happened within 2 days, 48 hours. But because they're able to do that, because they have the plan of action ready, they're able to react very, very quickly. And that's probably one of the few really good news stories that I've been able to come across in this type of work. Okay, so that's what you should do. Let's turn our mind to what you should not do. This may be a more interesting conversation. Um, I think we've all seen some mistakes from our clients. Let's share some of those lessons that might have been learned. April, what are your thoughts on what should not be done by clients, by organizations if they've been hit?
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest things is that they need to take it seriously, and not just and like nothing's happened. I think quite often something happens, people get scared, they don't know what to do, and they freeze. Take it seriously. I don't want to be a negative Nelly, but assume the worst and get people engaged quickly. Don't minimize what's going on. I mean, ideally it's not a big problem, but if it is, it's going to get to be a huge problem very quickly. So I would say one of the big things that I unfortunately see clients do, especially when I'm engaged quite late in the game, is try to fix it themselves and think it's not a big deal. And you really don't want to do that. You're just going to create a lot of issues going forward trying to remediate the problem.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm thinking about that in terms of um, if an organization's been hit, they might have lost some money already. They've got resources that are compromised. They may not be thinking about spending more money. They try to save money where they can, but in the long run, that could end up costing you more because, again, going back to even though you're victims, you also have responsibilities to your stakeholders. And if you don't act properly to mitigate and close off the gaps, then you're really opening yourselves up to more liability later on. Okay, let's go back to what we did in our last session, and I'll ask for your top tip then of what insights might you be able to share from your past experience as professionals, as experts in this field. What would be your most important tip or insight that you would want to leave with our audience?
Yes, absolutely, Alan. I'll go back to the example I wanted to mention around a client experience we had. A client had a large scale attack, multi-jurisdictional, international organization. Um, all their systems went down simultaneously, and there was a ransomware or there's a ransom request of close to $50 million US, and the ultimately it was sort of negotiated, and again Rock can probably talk about this better on how it was negotiated with the people, the fraudsters, but the insurance company advisors were able to negotiate that down to I think about $5 million and get the data back, but the client never recovered the way they were previously. What was important for us was they had all sorts of insurance coverage to perform instant response, perform recovery analysis, and even business interruption coverage. But what they didn't have was sufficient professional fee coverage. So they had to they needed the help. It's a large scale attack. So they had to hire all these professionals, but they didn't have sufficient coverage. So they had to pay out of their pocket. So that's sort of a lesson learned for future when you are looking at policies. Make sure you have the sufficient coverage. Engage with good insurance advisors. Um, the second thing is this happened a few years ago, and the claim is still being discussed. And this goes to my point earlier about documenting everything. And why that's still going on is because we have all these expenses that were incurred by various consulting firms in tens of millions of dollars, really. But some was spent to plug the hole, the incident response. Some was spent to future-proof, and some was actually improving their systems going forward. So now they had a fight with the insurance company to say, well, what is it really that we gave you insurance for, and what should we pay for? And now we don't have the people to respond to because it's been going on for years, and there's been a turnover of people, personnel. This is where again documenting everything comes into place. So I just wanted to bring that home with an example.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And actually, earlier in your comments, you were talking about professional fee coverage. I wanted to comment earlier because you mentioned the interplay between cyber insurance, but also business interruption. It's a very good reminder to have good discussions with your insurance broker to make sure that you have the coverage that you need. Insurance is not necessarily a one-stop shop. It often isn't. So it's important to understand what your risks are, what your potential losses are, and making sure that you have the coverage that you need. Rocco, what would you like to share about your lessons learned or your insights from helping clients react to breaches?
The biggest, maybe two lessons learned. One is prepare for the worst, always have a plan. And then the other piece, and April talked about this around just making sure that you're not going at it alone. I've seen from time to time where organizations rush through, they don't have a plan that they're following, they don't hire external experts to help, and they rush through what they believe is a containment of the incident and then a recovery of their business, only to find out later on that perhaps some things were left open and adversaries might still have access, or they just didn't really put enough controls around the environment so it leads to a subsequent attack later on. So the big thing is making sure you're preserving the evidence, you're not going at it on your own and just doing quick recoveries and hoping for the best. It's truly about a pragmatic approach to making sure that you look at each of your information technology systems and making sure that what is happening across those systems is expected behavior and that you are safe and secure before you continue to operate at full recovered state.
Thank you. Yeah, that's some good tips. Not something you want to tackle on your own for sure. April?
Yeah, so I think I completely agree with everything that's been said already. Another one I think is really important. It goes to something Rocco said earlier about setting you up for success so that there's no perceived biases happening. It's really important that everyone on your response team has no preconceived notions as to what's going to happen and what the outcome of your investigation is going to be. Um, Unfortunately, often, whether through negligence or intentional, um, part of the cause of an event is going to be an employee or someone that you have a friendship with or respect or a colleague, right? And that's why it's so good and important to engage those third party um, individuals to actually conduct the investigation so that there is no bias and that everyone's kind of going in expecting the unexpected and addressing those concerns without blinders on.
So thank you, April, Rocco, and Jaden for joining us today and sharing some of your insights. Fortunately, there are professionals who are available to assist, whether they be us at BDO or at Dentons or whoever your trusted advisors are. I think the lesson to take away is that it's important to rely on those who know what they're doing to help you get out of an unfortunate but likely inevitable situation. Thank you for joining us.